My sister-in-law, Clara, always had a flair for the dramatic, especially when dismissing anything she deemed old or irrelevant. And nothing, in her opinion, was more irrelevant than the strange, dull bronze key my late father-in-law, Arthur, had left specifically to my wife, Amelia. We were at the reading of the will, a dreary affair held in the solicitor's overly air-conditioned office. The main assets, the house, the stocks, the sizable trust, were split cleanly between Amelia and Clara. But then came the addendum, the final peculiar instruction. Arthur had been a quiet man, an eccentric collector of historical oddities, and a man who valued secrets. His study was a labyrinth of locked cabinets, antique maps, and books bound in leather so old they crumbled to the touch. He'd never been particularly wealthy until the last decade of his life, when a series of successful but opaque investments had changed everything. Now the solicitor, Mr. Henderson, cleared his throat and read Arthur's last personal note aloud. To my dearest daughter, Amelia, I leave the only thing of true intrinsic value I ever possessed, the bronze key. Its purpose is known only to the truly curious. Clara, you already possess everything you needed to be happy, which is why I must offer you nothing of material mystery, only my eternal love. Clara erupted. She threw her hands up, scoffing loud enough to make Mr. Henderson wince. Are you serious? A key? He leaves me the bulk of the estate, which is appreciated, but he leaves Amelia some rusty piece of junk? Honestly, Dad was always sentimental to a fault. That key is useless. It probably belongs to the shed lock that rusted shut 10 years ago. Amelia, ever the quiet observer, simply clutched the key in her palm. It was heavier than it looked, solid and cold. It wasn't ornate, just simple, with 3 precise, sharp cuts in the ward. The head was a plain circle, the bronze tarnished almost black in spots. It felt old, significant, weighty. But was Clara right? Was it just sentimental garbage? The key to the old garden gate? We dismissed Clara's rant, signed the papers, and left, the bronze key now nestled in a small velvet pouch in Amelia's handbag. For the next few weeks, Arthur's death hung heavy over us. We were tasked with clearing out his study, a task that quickly transformed into an archaeological dig. Every item had a story, every box a puzzle. It was during this process, amidst the stacks of forgotten history books and navigation tools, that Amelia rediscovered the key. It had been nearly forgotten, tossed into a drawer with some old foreign currency. We should figure out what this opens, Amelia said one rainy afternoon, holding the key up to the light filtering through the dusty window. Dad wouldn't have made a show of it like that if it was just for the tool shed. I agreed. Arthur loved a good riddle. The phrase he used in the note, its purpose is known only to the truly curious, sounded less like a loving gesture and more like a challenge. We spent the better part of a weekend scouring the house. We checked every locked cabinet, every old suitcase, every obscure storage box. We even tried the rusted shed lock just to placate Clara's earlier theory, but the key didn't fit. The frustration mounted. The house was enormous, a Victorian behemoth full of hidden nooks and crannies, but the key fit nothing obvious. We were about to give up, labeling it a classic Arthurian red herring, when Amelia started talking about his habits. He always said the best hiding spots are the ones you see every day but never look at. She mused, tracing the key's shape with her thumb. And he was obsessed with structural integrity. He hated poor craftsmanship. That sparked a thought. I remembered Arthur once spending a solid week repairing a loose piece of baseboard in the main hallway, muttering darkly about shoddy construction from the 19th century. We went to the hallway, a long, dark corridor lined with built-in bookshelves. These bookshelves had always been the architectural heart of the house, floor to ceiling, holding thousands of volumes. We pulled out a few books at random, feeling behind the cases, pressing on panels. Nothing. But then, I noticed something odd about the baseboard, the very one Arthur had worked on so meticulously. It wasn't the color that was off, but the alignment. All the other baseboards were flush against the wall. This one, spanning about 3 feet below the third shelf from the left, seemed to be recessed by maybe a millimeter. It was nearly invisible, hidden by the shadow cast by the lowest shelf. I knelt down and ran my fingers along the wood. It was smooth, but at the center of the 3-foot section, There was a tiny, almost imperceptible seam, like a vertical hairline crack in the wood grain. I pressed against it, thinking it might be a hidden button. It didn't budge. "The key," I whispered, turning to Amelia. "If he fixed this, he made it important. Maybe this is where the lock is." Amelia immediately crouched down, her eyes widening. "But there's no visible keyhole." I pointed to the hairline seam. "It has to be concealed. The bronze key is relatively flat. What if the keyhole is horizontal and extremely narrow?" We tested the theory. Gingerly, Amelia took the bronze key and began tracing the flat edge along the seam. It caught instantly. The key slid into the slit with unsettling ease, a quiet, almost surgical movement that felt deeply wrong, yet profoundly right. There was no click, no grinding sound, just the silent insertion of metal into a hidden slot. We looked at each other, adrenaline spiking. Amelia slowly turned the key exactly 90 degrees clockwise. The moment she did, a soft, almost inaudible thunk echoed from behind the wall. The 3-foot section of baseboard silently slid an inch to the right, revealing a small, dark aperture. Peering into the opening, we saw it, a tiny, brass, antique keyhole set into the stone foundation behind the wood. And next to the keyhole, etched crudely into the dusty mortar, was a single, undeniable word, written in Arthur's familiar, spidery hand: curiosity. The bronze key had served its purpose. It was not the final key, but the key that revealed the true lock. This entire hidden mechanism, built into the structural heart of the house, was a testament to Arthur's love for intricate puzzles. The true reward, whatever it was now within reach. We knew, in that instant, that Clara had been wrong. This was anything but useless. This was the beginning of the secret Arthur intended only for the truly curious. We just needed a second key, a completely different kind of key, to open the safe that was almost certainly concealed behind the wall. The air in the quiet hallway suddenly felt charged, heavy with the weight of 30 years of secrecy. The revelation of the hidden lock jolted us out of our stagnant grief. It was no longer a matter of sentimentality. It was a genuine, high-stakes riddle left by a man who delighted in complexity. Clara's dismissive voice, which had echoed in my mind for weeks, was replaced by a surge of pure, unadulterated curiosity. We had found the trigger, the bronze key's true function, but now we faced the lock itself, a tiny, antique brass keyhole in the heart of the house's stone foundation, next to the single handwritten clue, curiosity. "He knew we'd find it," Amelia whispered, running her finger over the rough etching. "He knew we couldn't resist. But where is the second key? This isn't the kind of keyhole you pick. It's too old-fashioned, too robust." The word curiosity was the real clue. Arthur didn't leave anything to chance, and he certainly didn't leave 2 physical keys in the same location. The bronze key was an action. The second key had to be a piece of knowledge. We returned to his study, seeing it now not as a storage room, but as a vault of clues. We stopped looking at objects and started looking at patterns. Arthur was obsessed with cryptography and logic puzzles. His library contained shelves dedicated to forgotten ciphers, books on early 20th century espionage, and an entire section on classic British word games and riddles. It was the latter that caught my eye. On his cluttered desk, pushed aside during the initial inventory, was a worn copy of the Book of Unsolvable Enigmas, its spine cracked and pages yellowed. I remembered him reading it almost every night, often chuckling to himself over some obscure paradox. I picked it up. It felt different, heavier than it should have been. I flipped through the pages quickly, searching for any physical clue. An annotation, a margin note, a pressed flower. I found nothing until I reached the final chapter, titled The Collector's Last Riddle. The page wasn't dog-eared, but it had been subtly reinforced with a thin, almost invisible layer of adhesive tape along the binding, a meticulous preservation effort Arthur reserved for his most valued texts. As I opened the reinforced page, a thin, crisp piece of paper, folded down to the size of a bookmark, fell out. It wasn't a key, but a message, typed on an old manual typewriter Arthur kept in the corner, and bearing the date of his 70th birthday, 20 years ago. It read, "The true path is known only to the first light of day when the sun strikes what is old yet always new. Find the keeper of the tides, and the reward for curiosity shall be given. It was a classic Arthurian flourish, poetic, maddeningly vague, and specific all at once. We analyzed it line by line. First light of day suggested a time. The sun strikes what is old, yet always new, was the core riddle. What in Arthur's collection was both old and constantly being updated? We glanced around the study. Old globes, antique clocks. We stared out the window, and Amelia gasped, pointing to the wall. The maps! He always bought new maps, even of places he'd never go. He said they were history's ongoing ledger, old but always new. Arthur's most prized possession was an immense, beautifully preserved 17th century navigational chart that covered half a wall. It was mounted high up, angled slightly to catch the morning light. We waited for dawn, our impatience a physical ache. When the sun finally rose, its first direct ray pierced the study window, cutting a sharp line across the wall and striking one specific point on the massive map. The beam landed precisely on a small, unassuming port town on the eastern coast of Ireland, a town Arthur had never once mentioned. More importantly, taped over the name of the town, obscuring the original script, was a tiny, circular piece of paper. It wasn't taped to the map, but to the glass that protected it. I climbed onto Arthur's massive mahogany desk to reach it. The paper was stiff and brittle. I peeled it off carefully. Scrawled on the back, in ink that matched his death certificate signature, was a single cryptic instruction. The first keeper, 3 spans below the sea level. This was the breakthrough. Arthur's house was full of maritime antiques. He had a giant ancient sea chest in the foyer, a massive oak box we used to throw our umbrellas into. We'd opened it weeks ago and found nothing but old woolen blankets and mothballs. The first keeper? In nautical terms, keepers could be related to locks or safety. We ran to the foyer. The sea chest was huge, banded with iron. Amelia and I heaved the heavy lid open. Inside, just the blankets. Then, I remembered the 3 spans below the sea level clue. It didn't mean literally sea level. It meant the bottom. I ripped out the musty blankets. At the base of the chest, the wood was darker, thicker. We pressed and pushed. After a moment, a sharp tug on the inner iron banding caused a section of the bottom panel, the false bottom, to spring up on silent, well-oiled hinges. Beneath it, lying on a bed of faded burgundy velvet, was the second key. It was enormous, made of heavy black wrought iron, shaped like a fat, ancient T. It was cold, functional, and utterly devoid of the delicate artistry of the bronze key. This was the workhorse. This was the true key to the safe. We rushed back to the study hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs. I inserted the T-shaped iron key into the small brass lock behind the baseboard. It slid in with a satisfying thunk. Amelia and I braced ourselves, half expecting a complicated maneuver, but Arthur's final mechanism was surprisingly simple. I turned the key once, slowly. The grinding sound was low and visceral, a noise of ancient machinery finally yielding. With a heavy scraping sound, a 3-foot square section of the stone wall that housed the bookcase slowly began to pivot inward. It wasn't a modern safe door. It was a concealed small walk-in strongbox, a metal-lined cavity built deep into the foundations of the house. Inside, the air was stale and smelled of old parchment and metal. It was illuminated only by a single bare, low-wattage bulb that had been left on for 30 years. The safe held no gold bars or stacks of money. Instead, on a single shelf sat 2 objects: a thick leather-bound ledger, its pages visibly bursting from the binding, and a simple cream-colored envelope, sealed with a familiar wax stamp, the Arthurian crest. The envelope was addressed in Arthur's hand, to Amelia and my name, to be opened immediately. 30 years of secrecy, 2 keys, a cross-country chase through riddles, and it all culminated in a journal and a letter. The true purpose of the bronze key wasn't wealth, but an answer, and we were about to find out what it was. The suspense was almost unbearable. That stale, metallic air of the concealed strongbox felt thick with history. the decades of silence now broken by our frantic breathing. We didn't even look at the ledger first. The letter, thin and immediate, demanded our attention. It was the last communication Arthur would ever write to us, sealed and waiting for the moment we proved ourselves worthy of his trust and his curiosity. Amelia's hands were shaking as she carefully broke the brittle wax seal, the family crest crumbling into dust. She unfolded the cream-colored paper, its edges crisp despite the passage of time. We leaned in together, reading the typed words beneath a final handwritten salutation. "My dear Amelia, and my name." The letter was disarmingly casual, starting not with a secret, but with a warning. Arthur apologized for the elaborate nature of the safe. He explained that the complexity was necessary to ensure that only someone dedicated enough to follow his clues, someone who valued truth over immediate material gain, would ever find it. This, he implied, was why Clara was excluded. She would have hired a professional to blast the wall open rather than waste a minute solving a riddle. Then came the core of the message, the first major revelation. "The ledger you see before you," he wrote, "is not a financial record, but a diary spanning 30 years, detailing a life I could never live openly. I was never just a collector of curiosities. I was a keeper of secrets." He explained that everything Amelia and Clara inherited, the house, the stocks, the trust, was merely the tip of the iceberg, standard wealth acquired through standard means. The true fortune, he claimed, was locked away, not in this small safe, but scattered across the globe. He then dropped the bomb. 30 years ago, I didn't retire. I went into hiding, and I took with me the Silver Cipher. The truth is, I was not Arthur. The man you knew was living under an assumed identity, an agent for a shadowy organization known only as the Archivists. My jaw practically hit the cold stone floor. Arthur, the quiet, pipe-smoking man who spent his afternoons cataloging Byzantine coins, was a secret agent? It sounded like the plot of a terrible spy novel, yet the weight of the moment, the hidden safe, the keys, gave it a terrifying ring of truth. Arthur continued, explaining that the Archivists were a loose, ancient confederation of historians, librarians, and scholars whose goal was to preserve politically sensitive and historically significant artifacts that might otherwise be destroyed by governments or warfare. His most recent and most dangerous assignment had been securing the Silver Cipher, a piece of technology, he never specified what kind, that contained information capable of destabilizing several major world powers. When I secured the cipher, I realized the Archivists were not the noble protectors they claimed to be. They were zealots, planning to use the cipher for leverage. I took the device and vanished. I knew they would search for me, and they would search for the cipher. The man who will eventually come looking is named Julian. He is relentless, intelligent, and believes the cipher is his by right. He knows you are my heirs. The letter ended with a terrifying final instruction. The ledger contains the key to the cipher's location, hidden within the personal entries. You must find it and destroy the cipher before Julian finds you. The bronze key was only the start of your journey. The key to freedom is the destruction of the Silver Cipher. Trust no one. And if Julian contacts you, you must lie, deny everything, and run. We stood there in the dust-filled silence, the letter trembling in Amelia's grip. The entire world outside the safe, the world we thought was real, had just dissolved. Our father-in-law wasn't eccentric. He was a fugitive. We weren't inheriting wealth. We were inheriting a global conspiracy. And the house, previously a safe haven, now felt like a giant, illuminated target. "We have to read the ledger," I finally managed, the sound of my own voice startlingly loud. "Now." The leather-bound book was heavy, its pages filled with neat, cramped cursive writing. It wasn't a day-to-day diary. It was a cryptic logbook. The first half detailed mundane things, gardening notes, weather reports, and complaints about the local council. The deception was brilliant. Then, about halfway through, the entries shifted. Instead of dates, the entries were titled with historical years. 1745, the Jacobite gold. 1917, the Tsar's hidden vault. 1962, the Cuban standoff dossier. Each entry described not historical events, but what appeared to be Arthur's mission reports, detailing how and when the Archivists intervened to preserve these historical items. We skimmed the reports, trying to find a pattern or a clue. The detail was incredible, describing covert operations in perfect, chilling prose. It was a career retrospective of a ghost. And then, we found the final entry, marked simply, "The Bronze Key's True Purpose." This entry was different. It was written not in a mission report style, but as a confession. It described how he secured the Silver Cipher, how he betrayed the Archivists, and how he used his considerable skill to create a decoy life for 30 years. The entry was long, ending with a final paragraph that was circled 3 times. "The cipher is hidden where I knew Julian would never look, in the place of pure joy, beneath the sound of 1,000 forgotten voices." We looked at each other, the new riddle replacing the shock of the letter. The ledger offered no other clues. The place of pure joy. We had solved the riddle of the bronze key, but the final, most important lock, the location of the Silver Cipher, remained a secret hidden behind Arthur's last sentimental clue. And the clock, we knew, was now ticking down to Julian's arrival. We had a secret, but we had absolutely no idea where to look next, and a terrifying sense of urgency was beginning to set in. The realization that we were standing on ground zero of an international conspiracy, coupled with the ticking clock represented by Julian, galvanized us into frantic action. We pushed the heavy safe door shut, locked the iron key, and then, using the bronze key, sealed the baseboard mechanism, hiding the evidence completely. The study, which had been our haven of discovery, now felt like a suffocating trap. We had to find the cipher's location, and fast. The clue from the ledger repeated in my mind. The cipher is hidden where I knew Julian would never look, in the place of pure joy, beneath the sound of 1,000 forgotten voices. The place of pure joy. That could be anything, Amelia argued, pacing the room while clutching the ledger. The garden? His old rowing boat? But the second half? Beneath the sound of 1,000 forgotten voices. That sounds musical. Maybe records? Or religious, like a choir? We eliminated the obvious. Arthur was a stoic man. His pure joy was rarely obvious. His greatest pleasures were often intellectual and solitary. We tried the attic, which was full of boxes of old LPs, but there were no hiding spots, just decades of dust. We tried the church near the house, but the idea of Arthur hiding a geopolitical asset in a place of worship seemed fundamentally counter to his agnostic nature. Then, Amelia remembered a small detail from one of the mundane early entries in the ledger, a brief mention of a donation. Wait, 30 years ago, right after he said he retired, he made a massive anonymous donation to the local history library's archives. Arthur wasn't a frequent library visitor. He bought his own books. But the local history library, that fit perfectly with his profession as an archivist. And what is a library, if not the resting place of 1,000 forgotten voices, all speaking from the past? The archives, specifically, were where the most historically significant, rarely seen materials were kept. It was a place of intellectual joy for a historian. We decided to go immediately, but a cold dread settled over me. What if Julian was already watching? We couldn't arrive looking like frantic treasure hunters. We needed a cover story. We decided to pose as 2 local historians, following up on Arthur's donation from years ago, claiming we were researching his genealogy for a distant relative. The library was a grand, imposing stone structure, exactly the kind of place Arthur would appreciate. The archives were on the top floor, a hushed, climate-controlled realm filled with long rows of metal shelving and the faint, sweet smell of aging paper. We approached the archivist on duty, a quiet, intense woman named Ms. Davies. "We're following up on Arthur. Mr. Davies' donation, about 30 years ago," Amelia said, trying to sound casual. "We were told he donated a significant collection of maritime papers and a specific item, a small brass pendulum." Ms. Davies checked her records, her fingers flying over an ancient index card system, not a computer. "Ah, yes, the Arthur collection. It was mostly logs and journals from the 1880s. Very valuable. But I don't see a mention of a pendulum. That collection is stored in Cabinet 7, the unprocessed rarities section. It hasn't been cataloged yet. No one has touched it in decades. Cabinet 7. That sounded like exactly the kind of dusty, ignored corner Julian would overlook. The unprocessed rarities section was located in the darkest corner of the room, near a huge industrial air conditioning vent that emitted a low, continuous hum. A steady, thousand-voiced mechanical sound that muffled all else. Miss Davies handed us a set of thin white gloves and the key to the cabinet. She told us we had 40 minutes before closing. Cabinet 7 was a plain, gray metal locker. Inside, the Arthur collection was housed in several large, acid-free boxes. We started digging, carefully lifting out bound ship's logs, old photographs, and maps of long-dissolved shipping routes. We worked with silent, focused urgency, the sound of the AC unit a low, constant drone. We were looking for the Silver Cipher, but we didn't know what it looked like. Was it a scroll? A box? It was I who found it, tucked beneath the last ship's log in the deepest box. It wasn't silver, or technological, or even metallic. It was a book, a beautifully bound volume, much older than the logs, titled The Forgotten Voices of Man, a collection of ancient hymns and forgotten poetry. But the binding was odd, far too thick for the number of pages. The book itself felt like a lead weight. I carefully examined the spine. It wasn't sewn. It was a clever, seamless shell. I pressed a point on the cover, and a small magnetic catch released, revealing the book was a casing. Inside, nestled in a cutout compartment lined with black velvet, was the Silver Cipher. It was exactly what Arthur had called it, a piece of technology. It looked like a heavy silver USB drive, slightly larger and more robust, with delicate, almost unreadable runes etched into its surface. It was cool to the touch and hummed very faintly, a sound only audible when held close. We finally had it, the object that had torn apart Arthur's life and now threatened ours. "We have to get out of here," Amelia whispered, her eyes wide with fear and triumph. "We have to destroy it. Now!" We quickly resealed the hollow book and put the boxes back in Cabinet 7. Just as we were locking up, a voice cut through the quiet hum of the archives, a voice that was too smooth, too deep, and far too familiar. "Amelia, and you must be my name. My apologies for the intrusion. I was hoping I might have a word about the Arthur collection. You see, I helped curate it many years ago." We spun around. Standing 10 feet away, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, was a man with unnervingly calm blue eyes and a faint, knowing smile. He was Julian. He didn't look like a spy or an agent. He looked like a wealthy, bored patron of the arts. He wasn't aggressive, but his stillness radiated menace. He knew exactly what we were doing, and he had been waiting. The final lock was opened, but the Archivists had already caught up to us. Julian's presence in the quiet sanctuary of the archives felt like a violation. He moved with an unsettling grace, bridging the distance between us in 2 measured steps. The Silver Cipher, hidden inside the decoy book under Amelia's arm, felt impossibly heavy now. Our calculated act of curiosity had paid off, but it had led us straight into a trap. "Julian, I presume," I said, trying to keep my voice level, channeling the calm authority Arthur often projected. "We just came to look at some old shipping logs from my late father-in-law's collection. Are you from the library's acquisition department?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "A commendable effort at misdirection, my name. You inherit your father-in-law's penchant for theatrical evasion. And no, I am not with the library. I am Julian, and I represent the interests of the Archivists. And I am here for what Arthur took." He didn't raise his voice, yet the weight of his words felt like a physical blow. He glanced at Amelia's arm, his gaze lingering on the hollowed-out book she held. He knew. He had to have been following us from the moment we left the house. Or perhaps he was waiting here, knowing Arthur's habits. "I assure you, we found nothing of interest," Amelia interjected, tightening her grip on the book. "Just some dust and a few mildewed journals. We're researching a family tree, nothing more." Julian sighed, a sound of mild disappointment, as if correcting a badly behaved child. "Let us dispense with the pleasantries. Arthur was a gifted protector, but his sentimentality was always his undoing. He hid the cipher in a place that meant joy to him. And what brought Arthur more joy than surrounding himself with the forgotten voices of history? The irony is quite poetic, don't you think?" He was telling us he had cracked Arthur's final riddle, perhaps even before we did. The implication was chilling. Arthur's clues weren't strong enough to stop him, only to slow him down. "I know the cipher is in the book you are holding, Amelia," Julian continued, his tone hardening just slightly. "Return it to me, and I promise you safe passage out of this. You will inherit the financial estate Arthur left you, and you will never hear from the Archivists again. If you choose resistance, I can assure you the consequences will be permanent." I knew we couldn't just hand it over. Arthur explicitly warned us to destroy it, claiming the Archivists were dangerous zealots. Handing the cipher to Julian meant fulfilling Arthur's greatest fear. We had to buy time. "Why should we trust you?" I challenged, taking a step forward to place myself slightly between Julian and Amelia. "You've been stalking us. Arthur left us a warning about you." Julian laughed, a low, controlled sound that was utterly devoid of humor. Arthur was a sentimental fool who romanticized his betrayal. He thought he could run a global organization from a dusty suburban home. The truth is, the cipher is not a weapon. It is an irreplaceable database of every single artifact the Archivists have ever secured. Losing it means the loss of centuries of history. Arthur convinced himself he was a hero, but he was just a thief. "I am simply the cleanup crew." His words introduced the first real doubt. Was Arthur truly a hero or a deluded fugitive? It didn't matter. Our mandate was clear: destroy the cipher. The moment I stepped forward, I had signaled my intention. Julian's demeanor shifted. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat. My mind raced, anticipating a weapon, but he pulled out a small metallic cylinder, no bigger than a lipstick tube, and pressed a button on the side. The second twist hit us. The large industrial AC unit, the source of the 1,000 forgotten voices hum, immediately stopped. The silence in the archive was absolute, unnerving. Then, every metal cabinet, every shelf, every filing drawer in the room, including Cabinet 7, began to emit a high-pitched, oscillating tone. It was a localized acoustic signal designed to trigger something specific. "That device is an ultrasonic lock scrambler," Julian explained calmly, his blue eyes finally showing a flicker of cold intensity. "It just sealed every exit from this room and locked down every piece of archival material, including your little book. Try to run, and the internal mechanisms will turn every metal surface into a painful sonic weapon. Now, you have exactly 60 seconds before the sound becomes incapacitating. Hand over the cipher." We were trapped, completely and scientifically cornered. We were surrounded by floor-to-ceiling metal shelving, and running was impossible. Amelia was hyperventilating, the book clutched tightly against her chest. I could hear the faint, high-frequency whine building up in the air. I looked at the book, then at Julian. My last hope was to remember Arthur's philosophy. The only way out of a trap is to use the trap itself. I remembered the bronze key. Arthur's first clue wasn't just a mechanism starter, it was the symbol of the entire quest. It represented opening what was hidden. I made a split-second decision. "I can't give you the cipher, Julian," I said, trying to project sincerity through the rising whine. "But I can give you the key to the cipher's creation." Arthur never used it again, but he kept it. It's what allowed him to take it in the first place. Julian's eyes narrowed, intrigued by the mention of a key. The escalating sound was reaching painful levels. "Where?" he shouted over the noise. I reached into my inner jacket pocket, pulling out the bronze key. It shone dully in the low library light, a simple, archaic piece of metal contrasting sharply with the high-tech terror surrounding us. I tossed it across the floor toward him. Julian's instinct took over. He hesitated for a crucial moment, caught between the cipher and this unexpected piece of Arthurian history. As he looked down at the bronze key, Amelia, guided by the same panicked intuition, used our distraction to sprint past the shelves and toward the massive floor-to-ceiling glass window at the far end of the room. This was the final, desperate gamble, the only direction that wasn't solid metal. If the cipher had to be destroyed, it had to be done now, and the only path out was through. The sound was agonizing, a physical pressure pressing against my eardrums and rattling my teeth. Julian, momentarily distracted by the bronze key I threw, quickly dismissed it as a final, irrelevant gesture. He realized his mistake the second Amelia reached the window. He looked up, his face contorted in a mask of cold fury. "Stop her!" he roared, lunging past me. Amelia didn't hesitate. The window was ancient and massive, overlooking the quiet back alley of the library. It was the only part of the room not encased in metal, designed to be decorative, not structural. She lifted the heavy, hollowed-out book containing the Silver Cipher high above her head. "This is what Arthur wanted," she screamed over the rising frequency, her voice thin and desperate. She brought the heavy volume down with all her might. The impact against the center of the glass was deafening, a sharp crack that momentarily eclipsed the sonic whine. The glass shattered outward, sucking the air from the room in a whoosh. The sudden rush of fresh, cold air broke the vacuum, and the high-pitched tone of the ultrasonic scrambler cut out instantly, the device's field disrupted by the breach. The silence that followed was shocking, absolute. Julian skidded to a stop just a few feet from the broken window, his expensive suit jacket flapping in the unexpected breeze. He stared, not at the broken glass, but at Amelia, his blue eyes burning with an almost maniacal intensity. "You fool! Do you have any idea what you've done?" he snarled, rage finally breaking through his carefully cultivated calm. Amelia was already climbing through the jagged opening, scraping her hands on the shattered remnants. She had the cipher in one hand. She hadn't thrown it. She was taking it with her, fulfilling the second part of Arthur's instruction. Destroy it. "We're finishing this," she shouted down to me. Julian spun back toward me, the moment of shock having passed. He moved with a speed I hadn't anticipated, closing the distance between us. He didn't punch. He used a quick, practiced move to seize the collar of my jacket, his grip like steel. "Where is the real key?" he demanded, his face inches from mine. "That bronze piece of junk is a latch opener, not a key to anything." "The only thing it opened was our eyes, Julian," I gasped, struggling against his grip. "The secret is gone, scattered." He was about to strike when a loud, insistent buzzing started coming from his coat pocket, the rhythmic vibration of a cell phone. He cursed under his breath, releasing me with a violent shove that sent me tumbling into a row of shelves. The distraction was brief, but enough. Julian answered the call, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "What? Are you sure?" But I had them cornered. "Fine. Get everyone out of the district. I'm coming back now." He snapped the phone shut, his expression a mixture of thwarted violence and dawning realization. He looked at the broken window, then at me. "This isn't over. Arthur's legacy is far too important to let two amateurs destroy it. I will find you, and when I do, I will secure what is left." With a final furious glance, Julian ran out of the archives, not through the window, but through the main corridor, leaving us to deal with the chaos. I scrambled to the window. Amelia was already on the ground, having dropped about 10 feet into a patch of soft mulch next to a dumpster. I quickly climbed out after her, not caring about the cuts or the height. We landed together, gasping, adrenaline finally giving way to bone-deep exhaustion. "The cipher," I managed, looking at the hollow book now lying discarded on the ground. Amelia held up the silver drive. "We didn't destroy it there," she panted, "because I knew he would just pick it up. We destroy it now." The alley had an old industrial garbage incinerator bin used by the library to dispose of sensitive, shredded material. It was smoldering faintly. Amelia didn't hesitate. She threw the silver device, the Silver Cipher, the object of Arthur's 30-year deception and Julian's global hunt, directly into the hot metal drum. It didn't explode or burst into flames. Instead, the silver drive hit the bottom, and with a terrible, resonant thrum, the runes etched into its surface began to glow an intense, blinding white. The metal of the incinerator shrieked as the intense heat of the device transferred to it, melting the cipher down into a puddle of molten, glowing liquid. Within seconds, it was gone, absorbed into the ashes and the rusted metal of the bin. The greatest secret of the Archivists was destroyed, literally incinerated in a library alleyway. We stood there, watching the smoke rise, the adrenaline fading into a dizzying disbelief. We had done it. We had followed the Bronze Key's trail, outwitted a sophisticated agent, and fulfilled Arthur's final deadly wish. The Bronze Key was useless, Clara had said, but it had opened the door to the safe, which opened the door to the riddle, which opened the window to our escape. We walked away from the library that day, not as the quiet heirs of a modest estate, but as fugitives who had just derailed a shadowy global organization. We had the ledger, filled with Arthur's contacts and methods, and the story of the Silver Cipher. We knew Julian would be back, but we also knew something he didn't. We now had the tools and the knowledge of an archivist. The house, the money, the keys, they were all just distractions. The real inheritance was the life we were now forced to lead. A life of continuous vigilance, armed with Arthur's secrets and bound by a debt to history. The bronze key was gone, a final offering to a distracted enemy, but the adventure it unlocked had just begun.